have another metaphor, and what do you know? It has to do with plants. But it also has to do with love, which I guess I don't speak about that much, but sometimes I do. There was an episode called Love, Sleep, and Meditation. I don't remember exactly how I connected the three, but maybe I'll go back and listen to it, or you can do that. During this coronavirus quarantine, I've been spending a lot of time out in my garden. And when I say out in my garden, I mean I'm planting seeds in boxes all over the house, and my wife can't wait for last frost to be over so I can move all these things out in the garden. But there are some things that I have planted out in the garden, like the carrots and the spinach, and I planted a few apple trees. And the apple trees are, I'm learning from the apple trees. I realize how that sounds, but I'll explain. Ram Dass, who is a spiritual teacher that he recently passed away, but I listen to a lot of his teachings. I watch either recordings of him on YouTube, or I read his books, or listen to audiobooks. And how I first heard of Ram Dass was when I went on one of my retreats at Omega Institute. The library is called the Ram Dass Library. This was maybe like 8 years ago, and I was like, okay, who's Ram Dass? And then I researched it, and I came to really like his teachings because of his humble way of teaching, that he never really shied away from the fact that he too has imperfections. And I think that guides me in my teaching. But the reason I bring up Ram Dass in the context of the apple trees is he often says, I'll take my teachings where I can get them. In other words, the whole universe can be our teacher if we're open to learning from it. So that's why I do learn from the plants, from the way that they are. For example, during the quarantine, the first week or two where I was just in my home, and I moved my entire private practice to telehealth, it was a transition for me, as has been a transition for everybody, but there was a destabilization in the change in environment. And I learned from my butternut squash plants that I had grown from seed, and then when they outgrew the one pot, I separated the butternut squashes and I planted them in separate, bigger pots. And they were growing beautifully when they were all planted together, and in that smaller pot. But once I separated them and planted them in bigger pots, it took them like a week or two to get adjusted to the new environment. So they stopped growing for a week or two as they got reacclimated to the new environment, and then they started to grow again. And I think what I've learned from that is that I have that same kind of grace period in transitioning my entire life to be in my home, my work, my social interactions are through the computer screen. The first 2 weeks of that was destabilizing for me. I lost my ground, I lost my homeostasis. I wasn't keeping up with exercise, meditation. My diet changed, my consumption changed. I was eating a lot of candy. There were changes. When there was a change in my environment, there was a change in my mental state, my internal experience. And that's the same thing that happens with the plants. If you think about it, this coronavirus has, at least for me, but I'm sure for mostly everyone, changed our environment, our social interactions, our work, our consumption, maybe any routine that we had as far as exercise, our sleeping patterns. Everything has changed. So in that changing, there's a period of adaptability that we need to readapt. And what I'm learning about myself and humans, and when I talk to my clients through private practice, through the screen, is that there is an adaptability innately in us as humans, which explains why we're able to adapt from hunter-gatherer to agricultural-based to industrial-based to technological revolutions. Humans throughout time are able to adapt. And so are plants. And so are viruses. This is I don't know much about the science behind it, but my understanding it is a new virus. So viruses are also trying to adapt and live. And in that, really every living organism is just adapting so that they can continue to live. But I'm seeing that in humans. When I speak to people, there's been a settling over the past 3-4 weeks. I mean, that's not the case for everybody. And there's nothing wrong if it's taking you a long time to adapt. But yeah, so that's what I learned from the butternuts, is there's that adaptability period, that change in environment. It destabilizes the plants and it destabilizes us. Okay, so connecting the thoughts, going back a little. Ram Dass, taking the teachings from wherever you can, and the butternuts. And my intention here was to talk about the apple trees, which I got a little off that topic, but that's okay. Coming back now, taking the teachings where you can. I planted some apple trees. What I've learned in researching apple trees is that if you plant one Pink Lady apple tree or one Red Delicious apple tree, those are the two types I bought, they won't produce fruit because they need to cross-pollinate with another tree of certain types. So there are some trees that will self-pollinate. Like I also planted a pomegranate tree. And the pomegranate tree will self-pollinate. But with apple trees, especially these types of apple trees, Pink Lady, Red Delicious, they need the other type of tree to cross-pollinate. The insects from the leaves of the one tree need to cross-pollinate with the leaves of the other tree. And I've been thinking about this in the context of human relationships and human love. What I feel, and maybe this is just my opinion, but I've seen it play over and over, is that in true love, if love is true love, it cannot grow unless there is a cross-pollination, unless it is balanced with true love from the other person. So what I mean is, if love is just going in one direction, it can only grow so much. These apple trees can grow. The tree will grow in the soil without another tree to cross-pollinate with. The tree will get taller, the leaves will get bigger, but it won't bear fruit. And it is only when it has another tree to cross-pollinate with that it can bear fruit. And I think that is similar with love. If love is just unidirectional, if it's only going in one direction, it will be a fruitless journey. So what does that mean? What it means is, well, in a lot of ways, I think the fundamental basis for love is trust. And if one person does not trust another person, then there really can't be true love. And if you're not receiving full trust, full love, then your own love towards that person cannot blossom, cannot bear fruit. So, what do we do with this information? I'm not sure. I guess really what we can do with this information is to know it, to know that that it goes both ways. Like if you find yourself in a relationship, or if you ever have, where there's fear, where you're afraid of opening up, where you're afraid of letting your heart go there, then knowing that if you're not pollinating their tree, if you're not giving that love, then you can't receive that love in a reciprocal way. It can't be unidirectional. The only way a pink lady tree apple tree will grow its fruit is that if it is giving to the red delicious tree. And the only way the red delicious tree will bear fruit is if it is giving to the pink lady tree. It's the same thing with a relationship of love, and really any relationship. Even if we're not talking about romantic love, even just companionship, it will be fruitless if we're not giving. When I say giving, I don't mean doing everything for the person and putting their needs even before your own. I'm talking about things like empathy, compassion, understanding, patience. And in giving the person these qualities of you, I think it's also a matter of trust that they will give it in return. And they can't give it if it is not received. Okay.